The evening started like any other. A grand family celebration. The grand dining hall was lit with golden chandeliers, the air heavy with laughter and clinking glasses. People spoke of success, the latest business ventures, and new partnerships. It seemed like a night for people to come together, to revel in the good times. But you knew better. You could feel the tension building, like the calm before a storm. Richard, your husband, was there, smiling, the picture of success. But you had learned by now that his smile was often just a mask. He didn't truly care about you. And tonight, that would be proven in front of everyone who mattered. You sat quietly at the end of the long, polished mahogany table, your dress simple yet elegant. You weren't there to draw attention, to steal the spotlight. You had learned to keep your voice quiet, your presence small. You didn't want to be the center of the room's focus. But tonight, something in the air felt different. Richard, as always, was eager to assert his dominance. He sat at the head of the table, laughing loudly, commanding the room with his presence. And then, just like that, he turned to you. His voice cut through the chatter, his words a venomous attack. "You're going to sit there like a statue all night, Emma? Maybe that's all you're good for," he sneered, his words sharp enough to slice through the laughter. Heads turned. The silence was deafening. But Richard wasn't done. No, tonight he would make sure everyone knew just how insignificant you were in his life. "Look at her, everyone, the invisible woman in the room. She's here, but she's not really here. She's nothing but a shadow in my world." Laughter rippled through the guests, but you stayed still. You weren't going to give him the satisfaction of reacting. Not now, not in front of everyone. You clenched your fists under the table, feeling the sting of his words. They weren't just insults, they were the truth, or so he thought. And then he did it. The unthinkable. Richard, in one swift motion, spat on you. The room froze. Guests gasped, their eyes wide with shock. You could feel the wetness on your skin, but it didn't matter. It wasn't about the spit. It was about the disrespect, the act of defiling you in front of people who should have known better. The silence that followed was suffocating, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Richard laughed, the kind of laugh that was meant to hurt. He looked at you, your eyes lowered in shame. The audience looked at you with pity, some uncomfortable, some eager to move on. But here's the thing. What Richard didn't know, what no one saw, was that beneath your quiet exterior, beneath the calm face you showed, there was a different version of you, a version of you who was ready to rise, ready to reclaim your power. You didn't move, didn't say a word, but inside you were preparing for the reckoning, a reckoning Richard would never see coming, a reckoning you had been preparing for, silently, for years. The dinner dragged on, but it felt like time had stopped for you. Every word Richard spoke was a blow. Every laugh from the guests, every comment they made about your invisibility felt like 1,000 needles piercing your skin. His cruelty, his arrogance, wasn't just a part of him. It was all-consuming. He needed to be the center of attention, the one with all the power, and the more you stayed silent, the more he took advantage of it. "You know, I could have married someone who could actually contribute to this family. But I settled for you. And look where that got me," he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. The guests laughed, some nervously, some genuinely entertained. You remained still like a statue, because that's what he expected. He wanted you to react. He wanted you to show him that his words hurt. But you wouldn't. You couldn't. You had spent too long being controlled, too long hiding in the shadows of his world. It was no longer just about him. It was about your survival, your dignity. And in the silence, something began to shift. As Richard continued his tirade, the thoughts in your head became louder. You were no longer just a victim. No longer just someone who took his insults without a fight. You had a choice to make. You could remain in this place of submission, allowing him to crush your spirit. Or you could rise, you could claim what was rightfully yours. The silence you had kept for years? It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And now, it was time to reveal your hand. As Richard continued his tirade, the thoughts in your head became louder. You were no longer just a victim, no longer just someone who took his insults without a fight. You had a choice to make. You could remain in this place of submission, allowing him to crush your spirit. Or you could rise. You could claim what was rightfully yours. The silence you had kept for years, it wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And now, it was time to reveal your hand. The guests began to sense the tension. Some exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what was coming. But Richard was too blinded by his own arrogance to see it. He leaned back in his chair, his laughter fading into smug satisfaction. He believed he had won. He believed that in front of all these people, he had finally broken you. But what he didn't know was that the cracks were already forming in his carefully constructed world. You weren't the weak one. You weren't the one who was broken. He was. And when you were ready, when you decided the time had come, everything would change. Days passed, but the humiliation from that night stayed with you. It wasn't the spit. It wasn't the insults. It was the realization of just how little Richard, and the world, thought of you. They believed you were invisible. They believed you didn't matter. And that was the worst part of it. But in the days that followed, you began to understand something. This silence, it wasn't a weakness. It was your greatest strength. For years you had watched, you had observed, you had learned how to navigate Richard's world, his arrogance, his insecurities, his need for control, and all along you had hidden your true power. You had watched as Richard's empire grew, as he flaunted his wealth and status. You had seen him bask in his success, but what he didn't know was that his success wasn't his alone. You had been the one holding everything together. Every business decision, every important contract, every step forward in his so-called empire. It had been your work, your quiet investments, your strategy. He thought it was his brilliance, but it was always yours. And now the time had come to reveal the truth. The more you thought about it, the clearer it became. You weren't the woman he thought you were. You weren't the quiet, submissive wife. You were a force. And Richard had no idea what he was about to lose. The foundation he thought he had built? It had always been built on your shoulders, your sacrifices, your hidden contributions. And now, he would find out just how strong you really were. The day came when you finally decided it was time. Richard, as arrogant and dismissive as ever, walked into the boardroom, his mind already filled with plans for his next move. He thought everything was still in his hands, but the truth was, it never had been. As he stood at the head of the table, speaking confidently about his latest business moves, you knew it was time to act. You stood quietly, a folder in hand. Richard, in his usual fashion, ignored you at first. But when he turned to you, expecting the usual silence, he found something different. You placed the folder on the table with a soft but firm motion. Everyone's eyes turned to you as you calmly said, "I own 90% of this company." The words hung in the air. Richard's face drained of color. The room fell silent. No one knew what to say. No one could believe what they had just heard. The man who thought he had built everything was nothing without you. "I've been the one supporting this company from the beginning," you continued, your voice calm but unwavering. "When you thought everything was falling apart, I was the one who saved it. Every decision you've made, every success you've celebrated, I've been there. But not anymore." You paused, watching the realization hit Richard. The smirk he wore so proudly crumbled. He tried to speak, to laugh it off, but the truth was undeniable, and you weren't done yet. Richard's face was a mixture of disbelief and fury. He sputtered, tried to laugh it off, but there was no going back. The power had already shifted. You had exposed the truth, and now the room was filled with the weight of it. "You're out," you said simply. The words were final. Richard stood frozen, trying to grasp at straws, but there was nothing left to grab. You turned to the others in the room. "From now on, I'm in charge. I'm taking control of this company. The world may have believed Richard was the one in charge, but it was always me. I've been the foundation, and now I'll be the one leading this empire." As you walked away from the room, leaving Richard and the others to deal with the fallout, you knew that you had finally taken back what was always yours. No one would ever treat you as invisible again. No one would ever dare belittle you. You had proven that true strength isn't always loud. It isn't always flashy. Sometimes true power lies in quiet resilience. The world had underestimated you for too long. But not anymore. You had learned to survive in the shadows, to take what life threw at you without complaint. But now, the world would see you. They would see your strength. And the future? It was yours to shape. You had taken back what was yours. And now, you would build something even stronger. Your empire, your life, was yours to command.